Good day. Um, this is another one in our series, and I'm titling these Reflections from Pharmacy Leaders for Advancing the Profession. And it's my pleasure this morning to welcome Dr. Julie Johnson, who is Dean and Distinguished Professor of Pharmacy and Medicine at the University of Florida. Dr. Johnson is internationally recognized as a leader in pharmacogenomics and genomic medicine, especially a focus on cardiovascular pharmacogenomics. She's also had the distinguished honors of being recognized with the American College of Clinical Pharmacy's Paul Parker Medal, and also the AACP, American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, Bullweiler Research Achievement Award. So it's my pleasure to welcome her as a leader in translational research. So I'm going to turn it over back to the slides, back to our views. Well, what I'd like to start out with is to have you share with us a little bit about your journey towards your position, your current position probably, and recognition as a leader in your area. And in response to this, you may want to think about key events that were turning points or people that may have influenced you on your journey.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the opportunity to share. So I would say that, one of the aspects of my journey that some people are maybe surprised at is that I never intended to be a dean of a college of pharmacy. And before I was dean, I was a department chair, and I never intended to be a department chair. And so I think sometimes people sort of, I guess, scratch their heads about that. And I think the thing that probably would describe my journey is, both from a research perspective and then just from an academic leadership perspective, is that I think I was always really driven or interested in, really trying to tackle and solve problems. And so, for really all of my career, I've been interested in understanding, really from a clinical perspective, but it drives my research, why do patients respond differently to a given medication? So you have 100 patients and they don't all respond the same. What is that about? And early in my career, that was really focused to some degree in pharmacokinetics, and then really for the last 20 to 25 years, much more focused in genetics. And and now we're really trying to lead the way in actual clinical implementation of pharmacogenetics into clinical practice. But before that, I spent about 20 years discovering genetic variation that might influence drug response variability. But in that pathway, it really was, I think, about taking on new challenges, not being afraid. I've never taken a genetics course, and yet I think it is fair to say that I'm recognized as an international expert in pharmacogenetics and pharmacogenomics. And so, being willing to not be afraid, being willing to learn from others, to learn on your own, I think was important. And I was able to get sort of into pharmacogenetics from a discovery side at a time when it was relatively early stages, and had really just the opportunity to take and was willing to kind of grab and take advantage of opportunities presented to me. Clearly an important mentor for me overall, but particularly on the research side, is Bill Evans, who's a National Academy of Medicine member, really incredibly distinguished scientist, and the former CEO of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. So he was actually my first department chair when I took a faculty position at University of Tennessee. And he was critical, and obviously a lot of his work is in pharmacogenomics as well. And I think, in some ways, I mean, he helped push me into pharmacogenomics, but really more, he just pushed me, right? And he pushed me to not sort of settle for you know, what at that time for a clinical pharmacist may have been viewed as enough, like good enough. And so, you know, he really has been an essential um, person in my career for over 30 years. And we've been having conversations in my college about mentoring, and some of our junior faculty, I think, don't necessarily understand what mentoring is about and what that looks like. And that, you know, some mentoring or receiving mentoring sometimes just means watching people and watching what they do and watching how they approach things. But also recognizing that people have mentors across their entire career, and those may change in some ways, and those may stay the same. And Bill Evans is an example of somebody who I would have called a mentor for over 30 years. And the way he has mentored me over time changes. And it's not like we meet every quarter for a mentoring meeting, but having somebody like that, I think, is really, really important. And adapting those mentors over time as your needs for mentoring. So yeah, I was able to really position myself to be sort of in the right place at the right time in a lot of ways on the research side. I've lost two bets with a colleague of mine at the University of Florida, where I've now been for 22 years. And the first bet was I'll never be a department chair, so I had to buy him dinner for that. And then the second bet was I'll never be a dean. So I have learned one thing, which is not to ever say never, because you just sort of don't know how things will play out. And so if I was so confident that I didn't want to do those things, then why did I do them? And in both cases, again, it was that I really saw a challenge of an ability to make a difference. We, in the case of the department chair, the dean called me into the office. I didn't know the source of the meeting. My chair had not announced that he was stepping down. And I said to my husband, I've got a meeting with the dean, but I have no idea what it's about. And he's like, it's obvious what it's about. He's going to ask you to be chair. I'm like, well, that's crazy. So he was right. My husband was right. And I told him no, that I didn't want to be a chair, but he asked me to take that because he wanted to build a strong clinical and translational research program. And so he said, I won't take your answer for a month. So I need you to think about it for a month and we'll talk again. And so we talked back and forth, and then I decided that maybe that was a challenge that I was willing to take on, and did that. And within a couple of years, we had the top funded sort of, if you will, clinical pharmacy or translational research group in the country. And I think, although those things aren't officially documented, I don't think there's any question that department has been the top NIH funded program of that type in the nation for probably 15 to 17 years now. So again, it was really having a very specific challenge put in front of me. And then it was really much the same thing. That dean then was stepping down, and my research program was going incredibly well. I had a new, very large grant that was going to get funded from NIH. I had stepped down as department chair at that point and was leading a translational research program within our Clinical and Translational Science Institute. But then recognized, and there were a lot of, among the top 10 to 15 colleges of pharmacy in the country at that time, I think 5 of them had open dean positions. So it was a very dense time in terms of recruiting deans. And I came to the conclusion that I felt that our college at that moment needed a really strong scientist as the leader, but also needed a pharmacist. And unfortunately, that's not a very deep pool in pharmacy even today. And I felt that if we had, somebody with a really strong clinical background, but not the scientific background, or the vice versa, that for different reasons, that was not going to be sort of best for our college. And so in the end, I decided to sort of step up and do that. So that was almost 7 years ago now. Actually, I'm looking at the date. I think it probably was literally almost exactly 7 years ago today that I put in my application.
Oh, wow.
So, which I put in at 11 p.m. because I knew the search committee was having a final meeting at 9 the next morning. So I really was sort of a slow decider in that process.
Or a reflective decider.
Maybe that's it. But I mean, again, it's that I felt that our college had an opportunity to really advance in the clinical and educational space, but it needed somebody with a pharmacy background. But our university was entering a time of really substantial growth on a research side. And again, that if we didn't have the right scientists leading, that we would fall behind. So, it's never been about titles or power for me, although those things come with the roles. But it's always been sort of about seeing a challenge and a specific opportunity to have impact.
That's great. Thank you. You really address a lot of the other question, but I'll phrase it. Your legacy in 20 years. I think you have a legacy now, but maybe to rephrase that question is reflect on your what are you most proud of in terms of your contributions that has helped to advance the pharmacy profession. And again, we could probably indirectly surmise what that is, but maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I feel like I will have a couple of different kinds of legacies. The legacy that I'm most proud of, we actually haven't talked about, and that is my training of future clinicians and scientists. So I have a very long track record of training mostly PharmDs in research and either in postdoctoral fellowships or in a PhD program, and so have really a large number now of people who have done incredibly well, and including the head of the Office of Clinical Pharmacology at the FDA, the head of genomic programs at the FDA, a department chair, several full professors, leader in pharmaceutical industry. So I feel like that's ultimately, and I think for any of us in education, that's ultimately our legacy is the lives that we have impacted, and those particular individuals. Obviously, it's a much more intense relationship. I hope that I've also through teaching impacted. Because I've been at it for a while and have been at places with larger class sizes. I think over 5,000 pharmacy students that I've instructed. So I think in some ways that's a legacy that I'm most proud of. I think for my college, I think the legacy will be the faculty that we've hired in the last 5 years. We increased our faculty size by about 70% and have brought in, I think, about 65 new faculty members, including sort of new lines and replacements. And it was interesting because Mike Schwartz was the dean of our college sort of 2 deans ago. And he too had an opportunity for really very significant growth. And then many of those people retired during my tenure because they had been hired 30 to 35 years ago. And so we talked a lot about really his legacy in the college and the contributions that those people that he had hired had made. And so, I feel that will be my longest lasting legacy is the people that I was able to bring into the college. I think from a research perspective, my hope is that my legacy really is about not just sort of scientific discoveries, but really translating those into clinical practice. And, we're only 5 to 7 years into that, but I do think pharmacogenomics is going to be an important part of the practice of pharmacy in the future. And, to the extent that I have helped get that started, I think that will be something I'll be proud of.
That's great. Thank you very much. The next question, advice for students. We're really addressing students here. Any advice for them in their professional journey, especially as they develop as leaders? And again, when I use the term leader, it doesn't mean they're going to become a dean or a department
Right.
chair. Obviously a person who will influence people to change, to advance, in particular the profession. And so words of advice for our students.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I'll say is what I tell all of my students, which is to be really, really open-minded about everything in pharmacy. So when I started pharmacy school, I intended to have an independent community pharmacy in my hometown. That was my goal. And, I hated chemistry labs, so I never envisioned that I would be a researcher, because in my mind early on, you would have to like chemistry lab to want to be a researcher. So, so I think availing yourself to as many different opportunities in pharmacy while you're a student is really, really important. And I think trying to find something that feels like sort of the right fit, the perfect match for your interests, your skills. And that may not happen immediately after pharmacy school, right? So, I think lots of people stay within pharmacy, but have very different roles. I have not. I've only been a faculty member, really. I've worked part-time as a pharmacist early in my career, but really officially, I've only sort of had one job at two places, And, but that's really highly unusual in pharmacy. So most people, have a variety of different jobs over time and in different spaces. And so I think, my advice is to really be open and, continue a search until you find the thing that really is the best fit for you. And I can honestly say I've never done anything in pharmacy that I didn't like. But I also, including, I worked in a community pharmacy for a number of years, and it's not that I didn't like it, but it didn't feel like the perfect place for me in pharmacy. And so, so I think it's just a journey, and it's a journey that might last for 50 years, right? In terms of continuing to search and explore. But I also think just be open to receiving opportunities that present themselves. And so, if I look at how my career has maybe been a little bit different than others, I would say that it's just because I've maybe been a little more open to accepting opportunities presented to me. And so I think, that's really, if you do that, then leadership, whether it's big L or little l, will sort of come to you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. That's great. And then the final question, the course is a history and pharmacy leadership course, and it's really teaching about the history of the transformation of our profession over the last over 100 years, but also looking at the people behind it. So that's the purpose of these interviews. But as we study 2020s, the decade of the 2020s, we're starting to write it. We started off and part of that decade that I will describe as a key milestone or turning point will be COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
And it will be described, I believe, like other things in history, as we study history, as a turning point for our profession. And the implication for that is this pandemic is going to bring many opportunities for the profession. So maybe comment on your insights into that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think I'm also an optimist. So that would be my other thing is, my other piece of advice for your last question is, if it's not your nature, work hard to be an optimist. I think my nature is just to be an optimist, but I do believe that this is going to be good, even though it's, a horrible thing for us as a world to go through. I do think it's going to be good for pharmacy. First of all, pharmacy's had a bit of a rough time in the last few years. I think in the public eye, I think community pharmacists in particular have begun to be a bit undervalued by the public. I think some of their, employers have not necessarily treated them well. But I think, you know, in this moment, community pharmacists are heroes. And I think everybody, you know, the most essential things are, you know, grocery stores and pharmacies. And pharmacies are not essential because of the stuff that they sell in the front end of the store. Pharmacies are essential because of the pharmacist and what they're doing. And so, so I think we'll get a reset in sort of the community appreciation for the role of pharmacists. But I also think that, you know, we really are going to see expansions in the types of things that pharmacists do. So I do think that it will be an inflection point where we start to see, you know, pharmacists more widely valued, and hopefully more widely compensated for significant contributions they make in healthcare.
Exactly. And I won't ask the question about G6PD deficiencies and that gets real technical, but we'll probably know more. In 10 years, we'll be studying that and then identifying those patients in order to target our appropriate precautions.
Right.
Well, this has been a pleasure. I really enjoyed this. Thank you very much for your time, and
Yeah,
thank you.